All right, welcome to the April 26th Finance and Facilities meeting. Today we're going to be discussing staffing as well as facilities. And we have some guests from the high school, and John's going to explain a little bit about that. And John, I'll just let you go ahead and get started.
So thank you. I invited Principal Jesse Barkey from Oceanside High School, and he is joined by Assistant Principal Cooper Marshall, also from Oceanside High School tonight. And Mr. Barkey has a request that he has asked of the budget to add a staff member. And it's a notable request because it's an administrator. So I thought it would be appropriate to bring that to this committee to have that discussion. And with that, I will tell the committee that I do support it. And I think you'll agree when you listen to Mr. Barkey that it is a reasonable request. So I'll let Mr. Barkey join in, and I'm sure he'll want Cooper to add his 2 cents worth as well. So go ahead, Mr. Barkey.
All right. Thanks everybody for having me. I'll try to keep my initial comments brief and kind of leave it open to some questions you might have, because I don't want to be redundant. But I want to also be able to answer any questions you might have in regards to this request. One of the biggest things is the evolution of the assistant principal position, especially I think for us here at Oceanside within the past 10 years. Historically, we hear the position of assistant principal and we just think about disciplinarian, somebody who's just kind of keeping order, giving detentions, issuing suspensions, and just doing that piece. But in reality, that position requires a lot more work to be done well, because really assistant principal is just another educator within the building. If we're doing our job well, we're providing students with different tools within their toolbox and different options and strategies to make better choices. We're partnering with our school counselors and our social workers and working as a really cohesive team to provide students with the coping strategies that they need to be more successful, not only within the school day, but also within the community and post-graduation. And that takes time. To be able to do that well and to be able to fully implement a restorative model, we really have to take the appropriate time that it takes to teach those lessons, to follow up, to have conversations with parents, to pull together meetings, to support different programming. And with 530 kids, Cooper is pretty well taxed as far as trying to do those things. So for us to be able to meet all those social emotional needs of our students, we're finding that responsibility, not for any lack of Cooper's ability. He's running around like a maniac, and he's able to accomplish more than most people do in a single day. He's a bit of a superhero, but it does require some of us to step in and help out with some of those things, especially on busy days, or cover IEP meetings, or to do a lot of those other things. So I had put in the request for a second AP after having some conversations with my colleagues in other buildings and how they use their staff, seeing that comparable staffing levels for comparable high schools is to typically have 2 assistant principals. Knowing that as we see the needs of our students right now, it's pretty well documented across the country that the social emotional needs of our students are greater now than they've ever been, which means we need to take a look at our supports and how can we better support our students, and put people in place to be able to provide those supports, so we can both be providing the proper education to them as far as their academics go, but also as far as their social emotional growth as well. And just looking at our data from the past couple of years, we've had more behavioral referrals for a variety of different things, from skipping class to taking a long break, to frequent absences, to anything more high-level behaviors. We've had more this year than we've had probably definitely in the past 3 years combined. So the needs are there, and the need for us to respond, and to respond thoughtfully and to do that job well. We believe with the addition of one other administrator in this would allow for us to do a much better job than what we're already doing. And I think we're already doing a pretty good job, but there's definitely room to grow and improve. You want anything, Cooper?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say anecdotally, I feel like there are days where at the end of the day, I say to Jesse, I feel like I did a lot today, but I don't know that I did any of it well, because you feel so stretched thin. And, you know, there are certain things in the day that require a response, like a behavioral issue, or some of those safety issues, or things that are required to make sure the school day runs smoothly. And when those things take up the majority of the day, it doesn't leave as much room to do some of the other responsibilities, like supporting teachers or getting into the classroom for observations so that I can provide some feedback and support on classroom management, or doing supervision and evaluation for staff, you know, supporting IEP and 504 meetings. You know, I have a caseload of 504 students as well. You know, and it feels like there are a lot of things to get done, and they are done much better when you know, Jesse and I can really spend some time and get that work done uninterrupted. So having another administrator to help support some of those roles, whether working together or doing a divide and conquer, I think would allow all of us to do our jobs much better.
John, did you want to say anything before we open it up to questions?
I do. In a conversation with Jesse today, he shared a number with me that I thought might be of interest to the committee. Jesse, you remember what we're talking about?
Was it the number of referrals?
The number of referrals to date outstrip the number of referrals over the last 3 years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I remember saying to staff, I think in the fall, that we had more referrals in September than we had in the entirety of last year.
Right. And it does echo not only the statewide, but the national trend as well. I hear from colleagues all over the state how difficult things are getting. You know, we are trying to serve the social and emotional needs of our students. We are trying to keep good discipline in our schools, but we're also trying to do things, as Cooper said, like teacher evaluation, support with, you know, instruction in the classroom and assessment. The high school is going to be undergoing, and is in fact undergoing, the accreditation process and all those things. So I do support the request. I think it's a very reasonable request. I know it always draws scrutiny when we come out and ask for an additional administrator, but honestly, given everything these folks are facing and the incredible job that I know they have in front of them, I think it's a very sound request, and I guess I'll leave it at that.
Good. So now let's move to questions. Lauren?
So can you, I don't need convincing, but can you describe to people some real life non-identified examples of what you see, what you're working with, what kids are going through, what they're presenting?
You know, I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is this. It's kind of, and a lot of these things are kind of happening in tandem. You know, we're seeing a lot of increased anxiety, challenging with students as far as coping skills go, the ability to have, you know, ongoing educational endurance to be able to really push through and persevere through challenging situations. And when we have, you know, when we're able to really sit down and work with the students and identify supports and tag in with our school counselors and do those things, you know, we notice a remarkable change in those students and their kids. It's not, you know, and change isn't always linear. You know, we're 2 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes, but it really allows for us to be able to identify and wrap around those supports when we have the adequate amount of time to do so. And the need is much, much higher. And a lot of the behavioral, when we talk about the number of behavioral referrals, we don't want to make it to seem like it's complete anarchy at the high school, because I don't think it's that. And I think, things are, considering what we're coming from, and a number of these kids haven't had traditional school for a number of years. I think overall, things, we've made a lot of progress as far as working on these things with students, but we still got a lot of room to grow to make up for that lost social emotional education that these students haven't had by not being in school full time for the past couple of years as well.
What does their anxiety look like to a teacher or to one of you or anyone else? I mean, what are students presenting when they're feeling extremely anxious?
It could look like a lot of different things. It could be a kid putting their head down. It could be work refusal. It could be a student asking for frequent breaks. Sometimes it's frequent absences or being dismissed early. And kind of ties into some of our other district goals as far as taking a look at for attendance for next year. It could look like a student having an outburst in class, because that's a defense mechanism to create space. I would say over the course of the day, we see the full gambit of all the different ways that anxiety can manifest itself, and it can create a variety of different challenges and problems for us to be able to work through with them.
All right. Any other questions from other people? Maria? And Dave, if that's a hand, it's going to have to go up higher.
I have two
Maria
questions.
and Dave.
Who generates the referrals, Jesse?
Any staff member in the building could generate a referral.
And the referral is for what? The kid is outrageous in class and he's disruptive and that kind of thing. Is it for Cooper's time?
I can answer that, Jesse. So a referral, we have different types of referrals. It all kind of goes into a Google form. So it could be anything from skipping a class to an inappropriate behavior in the classroom, to something suspicious that a staff member saw in the hallway, even something as like a teacher just documenting that they communicated outreach to a parent. Sometimes staff want to document something that happened, even if they addressed it in class and don't feel like it requires administrative attention, just to say like, I want to put this on your radar. I want to have this documented, but I don't necessarily need you to do anything about it at this time. There's a wide variety of things that can be set as referrals.
Okay. So my other question was, if there are behavioral issues and confidence issue and work issues, etc., I guess I'm old school. My sons are probably your ages, but we got calls to intervene, and trust me, we intervened. So when do you engage parents to help with the learning process? Maybe parents don't know that their kids are very that they're overwhelmed and they're not confident at school, or they're being picked on, etc.
Yeah, so I would say I communicate with parents on a daily basis. I know Jesse does too. I know, a lot of our staff do. So depending on the situation, I'm typically not reaching out for academic reasons. That would be more a teacher level or a school counselor, but certainly behavioral issues, I'm constantly reaching out to parents, even if the student is not, even if there's no consequence, I might reach out to a parent and just say, hey, I just want you to be aware that, someone reported that your son or daughter said or did XYZ on the bus. Like, this is how I addressed it at this point. But, and no one is in trouble at this point, but I want to put it on your radar. That could be kind of like on the lower level, but obviously if a student, anything from a detention to an in-school suspension, a lunch detention, an out-of-school suspension, like we are communicating that with parents. We often are bringing parents in for meetings in person to kind of discuss ongoing issues that we're seeing in the school, to try and work as a team and collaborate with the family to strategize ways that we can get improvement. Maybe there are things going on at the home that we aren't aware of that might be leading to these behaviors.
Yes.
Or at least we feel like bringing the parent in and bringing a team together, maybe it's myself, the administrator role, a school counselor, a social worker, coming together in a room with or without the student to try and improve. So, there are a variety of ways in which we're involving parents, and I think we try to involve them as much as possible.
I'm sorry, Dave, just one more question, and then I'll be quiet. When my kids were in school, I really did not expect the school to get involved in my son's emotional health. Is there an expectation today that you guys are going to try and counsel and provide, emotional, social, like being the cheerleader, being the fixer of non-academic issues? Is there an expectation there, or are you guys just stepping into that role?
I mean, I think it's both. I think there's an expectation. I think as a district, we have made a commitment that, that we know social emotional learning partners with academic learning, and both of them have to happen in tandem for students to really achieve success.
I didn't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, if the parents expected it or you guys just decided to, when I say you guys, I mean just education in general decided to provide that support.
And I think it varies. I mean, it depends upon the situation, and depends upon the parents and their own availability and skill sets and willingness to engage, so our relationship, we try to partner with the parents as much as we can, but that relationship, I think, looks different with every partnership.
Of course. Thank you.
Can I just jump in and answer too from Maria? We decided a few years back to make social emotional learning on par with academic learning. So these guys are following through on what the school board and the school district and the superintendent has laid out as our vision and mission. So it's definitely that, as well as they just as human beings see the need to help kids who are in distress.
And it's not that didn't happen. It just wasn't as my children were going to school. It's just it wasn't as, there was no name for it. The name was involved teachers, caring teachers, etc. They'd call you up, etc. And let you know what was going on. And I totally get what you're saying about parents. Some are very engaged and some are just, you handle it kind of thing. So I just wanted more clarification. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right, so Dave and then Mark, was that a hand? Oh, okay. All right, Dave, you're up now. And you need to be off mute.
Try to keep quiet. So, hey, I have what the driving force is, the interventions for the new position?
Can you clarify a little bit your question, please?
What is the driving force? Why do you need the new position? I think you're saying that there's too many discipline issues that you have to deal with at the level.
Well, there's a large number of needs that our students are presenting, and by adding an additional administrator, we're able to, as Maria was talking, like it's that time to make those phone calls. It's, as Lauren was talking about, it's that time to really dig into that social emotional learning. And time is really a finite resource that we only have so much of it over the course of the day. So to be able to have an additional person to dive in and tackle these things, it's going to allow us to be more effective in building relationships with parents by providing those supports for students, and to be really doing that follow through and all those parts that we need to do to be more effective than what we currently are.
I got the impression when you were talking about it that you're seeing an uptick on the demands on Cooper at this point in time.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. Cooper's typically got more work than any human being can do in a day, and we do our best to help them out, but we also have jobs that we need to do. So we're all being spread very thin by the needs of our students and our families at this point. So we feel as though this additional position would allow for us to address those needs a little bit better.
Yeah, then I got the impression that the biggest driving force is the number of intervention, I apologize. My problem is I don't know where it is.
You want to put yourself on mute and we'll go to Mark and come back to you?
No, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
My question comes in. This is a new need for the position. 2 years ago, you didn't need the position, right?
The need wasn't as great for the additional position.
Okay. What were the number? How does our numbers compare to the last full year of actual full-time schooling?
We probably have about, at this point, I only look back, well, no, the last full year, we probably have about 50% more referrals than our last full year of
So
school.
that's the 2019-20 year?
Correct.
Okay. Do you expect the number of interventions to go back down, settle back down?
I don't see that happening in the immediate future now.
Why not? At some point in time, the kids get used to coming back to school.
Yeah, but that doesn't happen overnight. You know, that takes time.
Year?
I would say it's gonna, you know, based on what we've seen and everything else going on and the conversations I've had with colleagues in other districts and things like that, you know, we're not looking at a short-term fix here. Otherwise, you know, we'd be looking for short-term solutions.
How many administrators do you have in the school right now?
It's Cooper and I.
So it's going to be a Cooper level position.
Correct.
So it's not just an administrator position. It's a vice principal type position.
So assistant principal, yes.
Okay. All right. And it's, I'm just going to question, if the numbers calm down, would it be a temporary position?
At this point, we're not looking at it as being a temporary position. So I think that's a question to ask if things change.
All right. Or anything else, or shall we move to Mark? All right, Mark, you're up.
Okay, I apologize for missing the initial part of the presentation. Is this a full-time position you're proposing?
Yes.
Could this, and I think this is kind of piggybacking along with what Dave was suggesting, whether with things kind of calm down, would this be a position that could possibly be split between Cooper level administration and also maybe piggyback with some other positions that need to be covered, or other needs, administrative needs in the school? You know what I'm trying to say is I'm wondering about making a full-time administrative position that maybe doesn't need to be full-time. And then again, I'm thinking about people who would, if we suggest another administrative position, you know, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions asked as someone's already been.
I'd like to answer that if I could. So, you know, my answer is we always look at that every single year to see if our staffing levels are appropriate. And I said at the beginning, and I don't think you joined the meeting, you know, people always raise an eyebrow when we ask for another administrator. So I wanted Jesse and Cooper to have a chance to talk to the finance committee and just sort of outline the need for it. I absolutely support the need or support the addition of a full-time assistant principal right now. Now, would that continue on through the future forever? I doubt it. I think things always change. There's always flexibility. We do reevaluation so that, you know, it could change in future. We've changed the way we work and the way we have positions in our schools a lot over 8 years. So yes, I would say absolutely, Mark, we would, you know, reevaluate if conditions change. But that being said, again, when I look at the statewide trend and the national trend of student behaviors and social and emotional issues and student academics, I don't see this being a short-term issue at all. I think this could be a trend that we're going to see for at least the next 2 years, if not more than 2. I don't think it's going to change just in a year after kids get used to going back to school after COVID. I think there are some underlying issues and concerns here. There was just a recent article in the New York Times, as a matter of fact, about teen mental health and how it's really reaching sort of epic proportions of teens in crisis across our country. Interesting article. I haven't had a chance to really read it in depth, but I think this was a good request, and I fully support it. But could it change? Most likely.
I have a couple of questions. Let me actually, Maria, go ahead and ask your question, and then I have
Really quick.
2 or 3.
Follow up. Is there some sort of pattern on the referrals? Are they like mostly freshmen, sophomore, junior, senior? Are they spread evenly, or do you see any patterns there?
I think there are patterns in the type of referral. I would say like the kind of class disruption, or hallway disruption, or that type of behavioral issue we typically see in underclassmen, freshmen, sophomores. However, there are other patterns of behavior like skipping class, or like leaving school without permission that we'd see more in upperclassmen because they drive. And so they might be more tempted to sneak out if they don't want to go to a 4th block class. But in terms of, so I think we definitely see patterns depending on what the behavior we're talking about is.
I only ask because there might be some strategies you can implement to squash that early if it's the lower classmen.
Yeah, and I think most kids mature as they go up the grades. So if some of the just more like immature, disruptive, or like, in bullying, I think is another example. Like we typically mostly see that with underclassmen. And I think as they mature, we don't see that type of like classroom management behavior in juniors and seniors.
All right, so I have 3 questions. I'm going to one of them is a 2-part, which is how I got myself down to 3. If you guys can talk a little bit about, apologies for the kitten. If you guys could talk a little bit about just the setup of people in Cooper. I'm kind of thinking the people you work with on these kinds of issues. So you've got the AP guidance. What does that team look like right now? And then the second piece of that question is, why are we asking for an admin level position rather than, say, an extra guidance counselor or something like that?
So right now, I would say kind of like our students, our primary student support team is made up of 2 school counselors that split the alphabet, a social worker, a student support coordinator, and then assistant principal. And so I would say the school counselors are obviously the primary for academic issues. Our school social worker, would be the primary for more social emotional issues with students. And then the student support coordinator is a role that definitely is sort of a gray area, touching on a lot of these, whether it's academic, social emotional, or even this year especially. I think in the past that's been more of an academic role, but given our needs of behavioral issues, that staff member, Nicole Hatch, has definitely been involved in a lot of our just handling and addressing behavioral issues. And Jesse has as well. I think, in his role as principal, just having to tap in, if we have multiple things going on at once, so we've all 3 of us have definitely, addressing behavioral issues on a regular basis.
Yeah, and if I could just, I'll try to be quick to add in, because I know you're a couple of the questions, Chelsea, but I think it's a couple things. As we're looking at where are we spending our time, and as a result, what are we trading off, or what are we not addressing or spending as much time with? Between myself and Nicole, our student support coordinator, we're spending a lot more time on discipline than we have in the past. And when discipline goes, when we're spending time on discipline, it means we're not like in the classrooms doing all those other things as much. So if we're taking a look at, as we're now analyzing where is our time being spent? We're seeing a lot of us are spending a lot more of our time on those assistant principal level roles. Could we use another school counselor? There probably could be some justification for that as well. I don't know that I would say in place of, but
Why not actually though? Because that's the piece I don't,
Yep.
I'm not following there.
So a lot of like the roles of Cooper and I are not only is health of systems and making decisions on resources and overseeing programs and making decisions on kind of the structure and the guidance of those and making sure that we're having healthy teams and those things happen, along with working individually with the students and the teachers and all those other things as well. Where school counselors, it's go a little bit deeper in those things, where our cast is a little bit wider.
The strategy versus implementation.
Correct. So the thought is by creating the additional assistant principal, this is a conversation we had, we talked about this, is that by being able to cover a lot more of that surface level things, we're going to provide more opportunities for those guidance counselors to go deeper with those things, and our social workers to go deeper with those things and do more quality work with more students, because we're able to cast a wider net amongst ourselves to cover those things and to make sure we had healthier systems that make sure things are working and clicking along at a good rate.
Okay. And then actually, I'm going to ask a sub question there. Didn't we add a position to that support team that you're talking about last year or recently? Okay. All right.
We had a student support coordinator, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago at this point.
Okay. All right. That I must be thinking of something else. Okay. My next question is, so a lot of this is clearly, I think we can say most of this is clearly driven by COVID. And if we're not certain that this is going to be permanent versus temporary, why not use ESSER funds rather than funding it from the general budget and making it explicitly that where we evaluate it as we continue on? And that may be, yeah, that's probably not a question for you guys. That's probably a question for John.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is I'm not entirely convinced that this is driven strictly by COVID. This has been a trend that we've seen evolving for some time now. I think COVID has certainly exacerbated the issue, but this is something that I've actually talked about with Lauren now for years, that we've seen needs of students, student discipline, student disciplinary issues, struggles with mental health, struggles with academics, struggles with home life and that type of thing increasing for some time. I think COVID has sort of been the super fuel for the whole thing, but I wouldn't say it's the sole cause. So there's that piece. I really didn't want to go the ESSER route because I think this is a position that could last more than 1 year. And I didn't want to have to go back and then make a case all over again for now why we need to add this to the general fund budget. I think what we should do is add it to the general fund budget and then reevaluate year over year in terms of both our numbers of students at the high school. So if our student numbers are dropping significantly, one would imagine that would decrease the number of referrals, or two, the number of referrals dropping significantly, that would decrease the need for the number of administration. But one of the things that I'm very concerned about, we have a very robust system of teacher evaluations. It's one of the best and most important things that we do is evaluate teachers. And that's clearly in the purview of administrators. Nobody else can go in, observe a teacher and write an evaluation for a teacher, only Cooper and Jesse. And they have a lot of teachers in that building that need to be evaluated. And I think given what they're facing now, I know that work is falling by the wayside. And it's not a knock against them. It's just a fact that a human being can only do so much. So one of the reasons I'm in support of it is I need the building leadership to be that and to be that support system for teachers. But we still need a strong core in there of administrators to handle discipline and other things that come up. So that's really why I'm in favor of it. It's not the one thing. It's not like just discipline or just mental health. It's sort of a combination of things that make me want to lend my support to it.
I have one final question, then I'll open it back up to everyone, and we'll start with Dave when I do. So Jesse, you made a quick comment early on that comps that we typically have 2 APs, and I was wondering if you could provide just a little bit more data on that, not just in Maine, but nationwide, because I know one of the things people notice about Maine is that we have a high admin to staff ratio versus other states. And I'm not saying that's a problem. It's just a statement. So I'm wondering if you can talk about the comps on both levels.
Yeah, I don't really feel confident speaking about the comps on the national level. I just don't have enough information to speak confidently about that. I'd be happy to dive into that deeper at some other point, when if we get some more data. But I do know I spend quite a bit of time communicating with both our colleagues from the North and from the South. And obviously we have some different school sizes and different school populations, and so we have some different needs. But I can say that we have between our neighbors to the North and the South, we do have fewer administrative positions than either one of those buildings. And I especially look like to Madomic, which is a more similar size building to ours. They have 2 assistant principals within their building as well, and they have for quite some time. And speaking with Linda down there and how they use those resources, when making this decision to make this request, we definitely feel as though with the long-term needs and consulting with folks who have done this for some time, that this would drastically increase our ability to be effective with our kiddos and our families.
Yeah, thank you. Dave, go ahead. You're on mute.
You're
Try
on
to
mute, Dave.
keep quiet. I try to keep quiet. So what is the estimated cost for this position?
I'm going to say 115 to 120 with benefits.
That's salary and benefits.
Salaries and benefits around 120, I'd say. Probably that's a good figure to use.
I know you don't know until you find somebody and you know what the benefits are for that particular person, but okay, so 120.
Maria?
Jesse, you mentioned that you've kind of done your due diligence and you've talked to folks at Madomic. I'm assuming maybe you talked to people at Camden High or Belfast.
Mm-hmm.
With their 2 assistant vice principals, are they getting better results with their students? Like, have you dived into it that deep where you can look at, is it helping by having multiple assistant VPs?
Yeah, I think that's a really challenging thing to get an accurate measurement. It's all kind of anecdotal, but I do know with speaking with them, they definitely feel as though a number of the things are much more manageable with the 2 assistant principals. Even if we just look at things like, our special ed population, with knowing that 20% of our students have an IEP, and that's not even counting 504s. That means that there's, if we average it out, there's more than 1 IEP meeting every single day that one of our administrators need to be at, which means that somebody else needs to be dealing with other pieces. Not to mention that the fact that as we're looking to expand our alternative ed programs and create other sports and have parent meetings and things like that, those buildings that have multiple people that can fill those roles can be more effective and flexible in how they're creating those resources and supports.
You see, maybe again, I'm old school in granting the 2nd assistant VP. I don't see it as just keeping up with the workflow. I would want to see improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Improvements in the results. Fewer referrals, better behavior, better academics, etc. That's what I would want to see. Otherwise, all we're doing, and this is just an analogy, I'm just helping you. I'm just helping you, shoveling sand,
Mhm.
keeping up with the sand. We're not actually fixing anything.
Let me
Yeah.
jump in. Let me jump in because I think we're moving away from the finances and
Yeah.
moving more into, I like to keep these at least for a little while more question oriented. Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, kind of talking about what Maria just was talking about and what John mentioned earlier. I mean, rather than, let's just say we grant this position but rather than going straight to the general budget, it seemed to me if we were to use the secondary funding, like Chelsea suggested, then we have a story to tell and we have a way to sell it to the public. So if I think that'd be an easier pill to swallow for the taxpayers if we can then demonstrate to them, yes, we added this position and here we have measurable results. And this is why we want to add this to the general budget the following year. Other than that, I think, given the way the budget's been looking lately, I think it'd be a much easier sell that way than trying to just throw it in the budget, the general budget. That's just the way I see it.
So let me just interrupt us for a second because it's 7 o'clock. So I think that I don't want to get too much in the weeds here because we do still have a couple of more high level things that we need to talk about and we just don't have a whole lot of time. So I think there are a couple of directions we could go here. It sounds like we have a couple of us who are interested in sort of making a recommendation that we use ESSER and then shift to the general budget. Later, we could also just have the conversation on a board level on Thursday. Dave and Maria, just like a thumbs up or a thumbs down about, would you prefer to see this in a general budget versus an ESSER budget? I didn't ask that well. Would you prefer to see it in a general budget or ESSER budget, I suppose? Thumbs up, thumbs down.
How about whether we would prefer to see it or not?
So that's not really a fair question.
Yeah, I think you're right there.
Because it's not a fair question because the money in ESSER is going to be spent on something or one or another. So to just choose the pot of money, and I get Mark's point, and totally we could shift money around, but the money is going to have to come from somewhere. The bubble's going to come up somewhere else. If we take $120,000 away from the modular project, we're still going to have to spend $120,000 on the modular project out of a different funding source. So I'm not sure that's a fair question. Is all.
I'm going to disagree with you there, actually, because I do think that we have to weigh priorities. None of these pockets of money are infinite. So I think that to say we have to make a choice one way or the other, I don't agree. Here's a better question. Would we like to make a recommendation as a committee, and Mark and Lauren, you guys are part of the committee in that regard since you're here, or would we like to have the board discuss it on Thursday?
I would prefer the board discussed it on Thursday.
Any other thoughts there?
I think that John also has to figure out if it's something he wants to include in his budget to us on Thursday. And I'd also like to say a little bit of something, Chelsea, and that is that there's this thing called generalized anxiety that humans experience. Any human, whether you're a child or an adult, can experience generalized anxiety. And it happens because of toxic stress, which means like at home, there's a lot of yelling or you're being hit all the time or stuff like that. Or you experience socially, like you can't be perfect enough. You have this fear of measuring up on social media. There's this part of the brain that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's called the amygdala. And what happens is humans end up feeling like someone has a gun to their head all day long. This isn't a small thing. And so what happens to kids that you see in your schools, in your school, is that they come and they're in response to that feeling of the gun to your head is fight, flight, or freeze. So some of your students freeze. They don't say much. They don't do much. They go as quietly as they can through their day.
Actually, Lauren, can I interrupt? Because we do want to keep it to the finance.
Nope. I'm going to finish this.
Okay.
All right. And so that they either do that or they flight. They don't want to be there. They don't come. They don't come in the morning. They leave early. They just walk out. And the last thing is fight. They just get angry and they have outbursts and they have behavioral difficulties, as we call them. So what we have to do as school districts around the country, this isn't just us, is we have to treat generalized anxiety, and we have to treat it in a way that really is effective for kids, because then it's going to make your job as educators so much easier. And I also assume that COVID has made generalized anxiety a lot more challenging.
All right.
So I just wanted to say that, because we have to address that eventually as schools, because there really is no other place that's going to address it the way we can and help kids with that particular condition change it. And then we don't have to spend so much money on other things.
Any last minute finance questions? Because I want to let these guys go. We appreciate your time. But I want to see if we have questions before I let you go. Any other last minute questions?
No, but I want to thank Jesse and Cooper for coming tonight, because I really wanted to get the committee's take on their requests, and I still support it. So thank you, Jesse and Cooper.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. We appreciate all
Thank you
your
for
work.
having us.
Definitely. And Cooper, it sounds like you have a really challenging year. So I appreciate how you're holding together.
I'm going to go get some sleep.
Yes, go do that. Have a good night, guys. Thank you. All right. So John, where would you like to move next in terms of staffing? And I just want to if you and Pete want to sort of think through the timing a little bit so that we have some time for questions, but that we also get the high level of what we need to know.
Yeah, so I guess first of all, that was really probably the most notable request that you're going to get for staffing. We're really not asking for a whole lot of new positions this year. I think, you heard the presentation from our special education director about those needs, and actually considering the size of our special education department and the size of that budget, those are really reasonable requests too. Both Peter and I provided the committee with some information on sort of current staffing levels and current enrollment in our schools. And I think probably one of the better documents to look at is the spreadsheet that Peter provided, which is sort of a general overview of staffing all across the district. And I don't know if maybe Peter could screen share. Well, there he goes. He's reading my mind. A little tough to read, but maybe you could zoom on that to some extent, just maybe a section at a time, kind of look at it. And if you have that document in your possession, you could certainly look at it. I don't have a presentation tonight. We really just sort of gave information and to the committee, and wanted to give you folks a chance to look at that and ask any questions that you might have. We can go any direction the committee would like.
Yeah,
I just want to say that I have a 7 o'clock, it's past that, commitment I got to go to. So thank you all. Great job. See you all later.
Thanks,
Hey,
Lauren.
good night, Lauren. Okay, so Pete, why don't you give us just an overview of what this chart is? And then if there are any questions related to this chart, we can ask those. And then I'll take a kind of glance at some of the questions that we prepared just to see how those would go. So.
All right, let me, can't find my tools for my Zoom. They've disappeared on one of these screens.
They might be more confusing. It's to your top, it's the top left.
Magnifying glass, is that it?
So are you seeing us? Let's see, I'm just,
Yeah, we see it on the top left. We're seeing a magnifying glass. This is like the thing we were trying to find earlier today.
Left of where you're at. Okay, there you go.
that feel better?
Or-
So, yeah,
No, it looks good. It's just, now you only see part of it.
okay.
I understand.
All right, I just want to go, I want to see the whole left to right. Can you see the whole width of it at least?
Yes.
Okay, so what I did was Chelsea was kind enough to point out that we had done this years ago. And so we resurrected the format, which was very helpful for me to kind of visualize what would be helpful for the committee. And I did a little bit more detail in how I went through our budgeted staff for next year. On the left, our positions. In the first column are district positions. So they're neither general nor special ed. They're district level, either central office, business office, superintendent's office, and some of the other department heads. Next, we go by school, and each one of these schools is split up by the first one's Cushing, obviously. The first row is just the general education positions and how many are in each one. And then what we're looking at is these are special ed. So if they can't be kind of put into a resource room, a life skills room, or an intensive support room, behavior room, or they serve all those programs, I put them under all. And so I have that same setup for each one of the schools: Cushing, Ash Point, South, Thomas and Grammar Middle School, and Oceanside High School. And you'll see some of these programs don't exist in all the schools. So that's why there's some blanks. On the way to the right, to the farthest right, are the numbers that we found from the 2015 iteration of this similar spreadsheet. And then I added today what I could quickly get from the 2022 budget we're currently in. And then this 2023 is just the horizontally across for each one of these positions. So the biggest takeaway for this part of the budget is there are not a lot of changes. There really aren't. There are always shifts especially between special education programs and also between the needs of special ed and general ed. Also to make sure that we are capturing all of our special ed costs properly. We want to make sure that those teachers or staff that are working in special ed, that we allocate the correct portion of their salary, if any, to special ed, because that's part of the spending gets reimbursed by the state 2 years later. So it's really important to capture those costs. The biggest difference, if you're comparing 2015, 2023, except for the sheer numbers in the program, but understand that the sheer numbers are not just because the programs in special ed have increased. The numbers are somewhat because the 2015 financials and budget was done in a vacuum. It was done by a non-RSU 13 employee, the budget was, by a contract hire. And the financials were, for lack of a better word, a mess. And there was no proper allocation between special ed and general ed. There was no differentiation, or very little differentiation, between an ed tech that worked in a resource room versus an ed tech that worked in general education. So the first thing that we did in 2016 and every year since then is to make sure that we capture those special ed costs, especially because it's so important to our subsidy. And also it's very important to our capturing the proper costs when we are calculating costs for special ed programs. This actually goes back to 2015 when the state statute has one way of calculating special ed costs, but it's predicated on good numbers going into that calculation, and our numbers were not good. So that goes to a different issue. The changes, the biggest change, we've had one teacher retire and not going to fill that position. That's going to be filled by Janet's BCBA request. So no net cost differentiation or minimal between BCBA, but that was a priority for her, and also the BCBA needs in general ed is also increasing.
What's a BCBA? I apologize.
Yep.
What's a BCBA?
Board Certified Behavior Analyst.
And that's special ed. That's special ed. So that's where you would find that normally.
That's covered under a specific something specific in the contract rather than a teacher, or is it not part of the
it's not part of the teacher contract. It's a non-aligned position.
Non-aligned position? Okay.
The other change, other than the one you heard proposed tonight, was that we have two ed techs in special ed retiring that will not, Janet does not believe that we need to fill those positions. Not because they weren't great ed techs, but I think as Jess and now Janet is developing her programs, the staff is becoming just more and more capable to handle the needs that are also increasing. But she was able to, in the last 2 days, go in there and say that we can reduce that number by 2, which is why the 2023 FTE position is about 2 less than the FY22. It really is a net zero budget before that position.
Peter, where is that? You know, I don't see the column headers. So are you talking about the high school for these ed techs?
That I can't remember exactly what she told me. The positions, I believe, were being, I think the retirements may have been in the high school, but but she's shifting people around. So that's not where the need is decreased. And I can't remember that offhand.
I don't either. And what I would say with that is she's continually shifting staff, especially ed techs, depending on where the needs are in the system, and those change throughout the course of the year. So where they start may not be where they end up.
And where they end up in May may not be what April or even June. It always changes. And at some point we have to put a stamp on it and say, okay, it's final for budgeting purposes. But the shifts happen constantly, especially with new students entering and leaving the programs.
I was just curious to see if the reductions are at the high school, because that doesn't line up with increased referrals.
No.
So that was the motivation behind my question.
No, it's a good question, but no, it's not related to that, and it was not reduced there. The again, not much more to say about a status quo budget with no changes.
Good question. I can't tell on I'm looking at my screen, so it will look a little different than yours. What is the second page for me? Also includes like the other funds and student support. So that equals our total staffing. Is that accurate?
Correct. I don't have that up, but down at the bottom of the screen, I've carried those numbers forward over here. So that's our total staff here.
Okay, that's nice. So of course, those are the ones that are being funded through grants and things like that. Okay, that's nice. I like this chart. I do
too. I think it's great. I'm going to try to backfill as much as I can through the years over time, as I think it's a great tool, not just for budgeting, but I think just for operating. So to me, it's a decision useful tool, and the reductions are at South School, says Janet, who's watching.
Oh yes, that's right. She always watches meetings. Hi, Janet. Okay, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions from our pre-prepped questions, and then I'll come back to get other people's questions. So one of the questions that I hear a lot of times are like unfilled positions and so forth, because so one of the reasons, this is at least what I understand, is that one of the reasons we have we're under budget this year is that we don't have all of our positions filled. So can you talk a little bit about which positions are currently unfilled?
I don't have that list with me, but I think I touched on it in a different meeting. The positions, we don't have any positions that have stayed unfilled for any length of time. So what we're seeing is we're just seeing turnover, and we're seeing positions unfilled temporarily. So there's always more turnover, but there seems to be more turnover now than there has been. So, and then the time between somebody leaving and filling that position has increased. So we're not, when we budget 175 days, we may only be paying for 140 days because of the time between somebody leaving for whatever reason, leaving the area, and then hiring that position. So I did talk to Allie about our positions and went through the openings, and none of them are really similar to what we were experiencing with that Spanish position years ago. That was when it stayed open. We couldn't find anybody for a long time. So I hope that answers your question, but they seem to be more just the time between filling positions is increasing, which is good for the budget, but bad for operations.
Right. Okay. And that will come back to, because it's not relevant to this chart, and nor is that. Okay. All right. So those are all the questions that the committee had sort of submitted in advance that are relevant for this chart. So does anyone have any questions you guys want to ask?
I asked mine. Thank you.
Dave, because I can't see your mouth. Mark. All right. Okay. Anything else you guys want to talk about staffing? If not, I'll ask the other couple of questions that we have. All right. I'll ask. Oh, go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say, I think that's it for us. So
Okay.
ask questions.
So one question I had when I was looking at the budget, I feel like I don't have a good handle on this. So if we're looking at the line numbers, individual things, it says salaries, it says benefits, and it says retirement. So can you guys talk? So salary is obvious. That's a salary. What goes into the benefit line exactly?
Health, dental, taxes, 403B, ER matches, employer matches.
So why would so what is retirement versus benefits then?
Retirement, the 403B would be under retirement, but the main PERS, their taxes would go into retirement. Although regular employees, their taxes go into benefits.
Oh, okay. So that's so retirement is not purely retirement, and benefits is not purely. Okay.
I can verify that, but definitely the FICA, those unemployment charges would go to the benefit line.
Oh, so federal retirement, not necessarily like.
Well, the main PERS would all be under retirement. I'll check on the matching taxes, but the federal unemployment, main state unemployment, those would all go for those staff that applies to would go into that. The cost of workers' comp insurance would go into that as a benefit.
With that, we're talking benefits to the retirement.
Benefits.
The benefits.
Workers' comp would be expensed there, and then.
What about the employer portion of Social Security tax?
Benefits, I believe, but I'm going to check on that. I'll go through that and just verify what is in that number.
All right, that makes sense, because a lot of times I see weird numbers and I'm like, I know it's too high for health insurance, but why is retirement being in both? So that makes it.
And you'll see it under the federally funded positions. If you ever look at those pieces in the budget, it wouldn't be in the general fund, but if you look at those, the retirement is much higher. There's a much higher federal tax on retirement for grant funded. There's another, it's like 8 or 9%. It's pretty substantial.
I hope and the teachers don't get that. That just goes to administrative funds, right? Or the staff don't.
I don't know, but that's what we do is that's why we've over, if you've seen from 2015 to 2023, we've shifted a lot of positions, as many as we can, out of the grant funded positions. First, because the bookkeeping for that and the compliance is incredibly hard, but it allows us to spend that money. We still spend it, but we move the contracted services over to that, which is easier to do, and we don't get taxed as much. We get bigger bang for the buck.
So a question that I had from someone locally was, so the health insurance, I'm assuming, and I'm interpreting a little bit of this based on information we've gotten. So I'm assuming that, so we have support staff contracts and we have what's called the professional staff contract. I'm assuming that non-aligned hourly, their benefits match the same benefits that are in the support contract. Is that true? And is that also true for professional staff and non-aligned professional staff?
No, the non-aligned professional staff and hourly staff start with a base contract. They negotiate each piece of this individually, but the base contract starts at a standard 500 plan. That's the contribution to non-aligned starts at that level, not at the choice 200 plan.
Okay. And are we covering the same percentage that we cover for the support and professional staff family plans?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. Can you send us a copy of that contract? Because I've never seen that contract.
Yep.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
So again, it's a template because it's, again, they're negotiated individually.
Right. Well, I think if it's a base, if you can send the base contract,
Yep,
that would
yep,
be helpful
yep.
because presumably, well, I have more questions on that, but we'll stop there. Okay. And then sub costs. That's the other thing on my list that I wanted to ask about.
I have one other question about the same thing here.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
How much do we pay for the Maine state retirement per? Is it it's a percent, is it a percentage of salary?
Yes.
Do you know what it is?
I don't know offhand. I can,
But that should be in the, no, that wouldn't be in the contract because
it's not.
there are 20 different retirement plans and I get them mixed.
It is on the Maine PERS. If you look at Maine PERS, it's on their website. It's easily accessible. It's the rates.
All right. Actually, yeah, we'll go on to other questions and then we can come back to the sub cost. That was just the question that we prepared. Maria, go ahead.
Do we contribute to the 403B?
Depending on the contract, yes.
Okay, so we contribute to the state pension and the private 403B.
It depends on the contract, but some contracts do, and I don't recall if the teacher contract has a matching portion or not for that
Okay,
reason.
Just curious, you know, who
The
negotiated that?
last contract.
Actually, this doesn't make sense for this budget season, but I think it would be really helpful to, so we just did that nice staffing chart, to have a chart of what the retirement benefits look like for different staff members, because I think that would help us really evaluate. A lot of our questions are about equity and are we treating different categories of staff equitably? And I think that would, having it on a single page would be really clear. And would be just beneficial for the board to be able to make decisions in the future.
It's also, it's harder than just putting it together on a chart, because when you can offer somebody a choice in their retirement benefit and their health benefit and their salary and offset those differences. So I might be one who might negotiate a more appropriate health benefit for myself, which might be $1,000 deductible. But I'd like to have the money to instead, or a portion of the savings I'd like to have in salary. I mean, as I'm negotiating, I might want something like that. So there's
Well, but we should still be able to see the base contract.
Yeah,
and
no,
then
I agree.
deviations.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and I also think that that's where we do have that policy where the board is supposed to be approving these contracts. So I think that is something that would sort of complement that process well. But I'm getting off track. So Dave and Mark, do you guys have any questions?
Nope.
All right, and Maria, you're good?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, so the question about sub costs was the only other question the committee submitted in advance that we haven't talked about. Except for we're once again we have an extra 10 minutes this time to talk about facilities.
Maybe 15, because I'm not sure I have much on subs.
Okay, well, there we go.
The data has been so bad for the last 2.5 years on subs. I'm just going back to my original plan to budget as best I can to estimate that, and then to make sure that we are coding subs appropriately. What I mean by that is a conversation we've had, that I want to make sure that a sub who is in a position, a long-term sub, is not really a sub. We're talking about subs, like we're coming in from
like
a day
actual
or
subs,
two.
yeah.
So so the data is still not good, and these last couple of years didn't help with that. We are coding them properly now and differently. So we're differentiating the two. So I don't have an answer or even a basis for an answer.
Okay, but it looks like from my calculations, we're budgeting about, I think my calculations might be slightly under, but about 325,000 for subs this year. Does that sound about right?
That's probably right, because I know at least one category is half that.
Wait, we'll say that again.
One category of position, like either teacher.
Oh, one category.
Like
Gotcha.
one category is definitely that. So that would make sense. We budget for those positions that we have to fill. It's the teaching, it's the bus driver. It's those positions that we have to. We do without if we can, but There's no sub for me. There's no sub for any of the central office staff.
What a shame. That would be nice, wouldn't it, to come in?
I would love to have a
and someone
sub.
else do your job.
Any volunteers here on the screen? I could.
Sure, I'll do it. You might not like the results, however. Okay. I will say I am glad to see that number coming down, because in previous years it was much higher, although it's hard to tell how much of that was coding versus actual use.
Yeah, I think we're doing better at tracking it.
Okay, facilities. How about a 5-minute presentation on facilities?
We
And
can do
then
it
we have
pretty
10 minutes for questions.
We could do it pretty quick. I'm just going to go back to that report. And
do
you
we
don't
have
mind-
the updated CIP? Because that's one thing that we haven't seen since the fall, what those costs were and what we are planning to borrow money for, and where we stand on what's been undone.
Which costs?
The capital improvement plan that Steve provided us, which was like at the time about $8 million in maintenance costs that we needed to do. And then,
yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that one.
I'll send his update. It's
okay. Yeah, it'd be nice to have an update about that, particularly since some of that we are looking to fund through the renovation fund. So, and also some of those costs he didn't keep. So I'd like to know just sort of where
he's gone through and identified the ones from the renovation fund. So he's highlighted some of those things, and I'll send you that spreadsheet.
Okay. All right. So we'll get that. Okay.
Yep. I'm just going to share the raw screen, the presentation. Not the fancy. So can you see the facilities?
Yes.
All right. I will just go back and just at a glance. Again, this is for, intended for new board members and new people that may tune in at some point. This is how we're operating. We have 7 buildings. We have 1 director, and we have 22 staff, including 4 currently that are unfilled, but not always unfilled, just partially currently unfilled. There's been no change in this since 2016, when in anticipation of going from 10 buildings to 7, we cut 2 positions, and I think we cut 2 the year prior to that too. And the other change is that we used to have a director and a custodial supervisor, and we've eliminated that custodial supervisor position and made the director just a director of facilities, not split between facilities and transportation. And we've had no change in staff, even though our square footage has actually increased since 2019 with the high school, middle school, and the new Ash Point School, as well as the use of the South School for pre-K classrooms, and not to mention new modulars if they come online. That will be something we've got to consider. Staff is just Steve's done an incredible job kind of training the staff to where they are now, where they're just getting better and better and better, and he's really got some great staff in these buildings. We know that because if he didn't, we would hear about it, and right now we're not, which is a testament to what he's done over the last supervisor last 5 years, kind of boots on the ground management by walking around style. So I think you have all these slides. So I can just fly through these things. Kind of, this kind of how he sees it operating. What I can't remember if I put this later on, but I'll touch in a second. Again, these are just definitions of DOE definitions of what facilities is and how we code them. This is really by school. This is more of a maintenance side. The 2600 is more maintenance by school. Physical plant. It also includes grounds in here usually, although we may end up breaking that out at some point. So that's 2600. 2610 is the same, but it's for the custodial side of things. So that's really just to clean or care operation, the cleaning of the plant. And then 2620 is district-wide activities. So the director would be here, his office, and then I usually use a lot of things that I just can't if we buy supplies that are district-wide that we really can't allocate in an effective way, I code them here. And then what we don't usually see in this budget, we will see in the capital budget, and some capital renovation will be in the general budget, but this is really enhancements and renovations. So new facilities, new square footage versus repaired and renovated square footage that may increase its life expectancy. As the budget goes, in these categories, you could see that we're, really, these are the changes, minor changes for the most part. Insurance is up, and energy is not minor, is really up a lot. And this is, for those who haven't watched before or been here, we are budgeting a 70% increase, 70% increase in all of our energy costs. And that's based on what these last couple of months have been, and expectations that the relative change should be about the same. It doesn't mean we shouldn't put money into our fuel reserve fund just in case, but this is a pretty substantial increase, and I think it's an appropriate increase. I don't think it's over budgeting, and I hope it's not under budgeting. Custodial salaries and benefits, that's primarily wages and benefit changes in staffing, and then a small increase in supplies. The district costs, again, minor increases. This is generally the district-wide costs, as well as fuel, again, is part of that big increase. And then 2690 is where we code our payment to our performance contract, the energy and air quality project that we did back in 2016 or 17 now, it seems like. But because that's a lease finance, not a bond, it shows up in the facilities as a payment in there. And then we have another lease for the part of the upgrades to our infrastructure in there. We did a partial lease on that, the capital lease. So summary of the changes, $338,000. Again, more than half of that is fuel. And then we reduced the contingency down to zero. We did all the contingencies down to zero, as I mentioned in a previous presentation. So our net increase is just under 6%. And without the energy, it would be 0.6%.
Hold on, quick question there, because the number in
So 5.9% represents the 338,000, not the net amount.
because I saw 12.7% for that department, and then maybe I was looking at something incorrectly.
I could check, but it should. I don't think so.
All right, I'll see if I can find out where I had that number. Go ahead.
Okay.
Oh, and can you actually explain the 2600 maintenance a little bit more too? The maintenance line.
It's everything. It's everything from it could be building cubbies in a building. It could be repairs on playgrounds. It's really the non-cleaning expenses that we have by our maintenance and custodial department. It would be lights, electricity, contracted services for any kind of problems we have. Telephone services would come under that, and maintenance.
What is the repair and maintenance service contract in that section?
That would be probably the Siemens contract on our boilers.
No, well, so is that different from the 2690?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. So that would be like it's like 95,000 at Oceanside
Yeah, it's
or
about,
the high school.
it's
last
about
year.
200, it's about $215,000 a year split between the buildings based on square footage.
Yeah, that actually probably is about correct. Is it going down year over year?
No, that's actually been flat for like a couple of years. We negotiated, we'll see an increase in 2024, but I think 23 was flat.
The reason I'm asking is the line I'm looking at is a decrease. So I'm not looking at
I may have allocated it differently. I may have just didn't, I'm not sure.
Okay. Yeah, it just says repair and maintenance services contract, non-technical
It might,
repair and maintenance, 2,600, 54,300.
yeah, in 54,300, you'll see that some of those numbers in 54,300 went down substantially, but 54,310 or 320 went up. What I'm trying to do is capture the costs more accurately. So you'll see that I moved, snow removal versus lawn care are now broken out by contract, as opposed to just lumped into that one number.
So that's not a new cost. That's just a rearrangement.
It's a rearrangement. It's just, again, decision useful. I see that as when you see, when it's all in one line, like when you see the budget all in one line, it's hard to really know what's in there. And so I think that knowing what your grounds fees are versus your snow fees are, and especially when I'm trying to discuss, do analysis on if it's better to contract out some of these services or do them in-house. So that's why I'm trying to get an understanding of what the total cost is on some of these things, so I can come back and say, yes, I recommend we go spend $300,000 on equipment because this is what we'll save over time or over 7 years, or the payback is, when the break even will be.
Okay, one quick question, and then I'll let you continue or hear from other people. So
Chelsea,
what
Chelsea, let me just bust in here real quick. I'm going to bug out, folks. So good night.
Right.
John, I'll see you tomorrow night, and I'll see you all on Thursday. Okay.
All right. Have a good night, Mark.
Take care.
So the number that I saw that was 12.71% is just, it says total facilities.
That might, I'd have to look.
Okay.
You screenshot it or send me the line item and I'll look at it tomorrow.
There is no line item. It's just a budget by department. It's just how you define total.
On the summary page?
No. It's on the report 79059, which is the only one I've looked at.
Okay. I'll see if I can find.
To be determined. Okay, that's fine. All right. I will not talk anymore because I get us distracted.
What is included in this budget is a stipend. Oh no, it's not included in something that we'd like to consider, but I think we can probably do it within the current confines of the budget. Is lead building coordinators. So we're trying to have somebody, because we don't have that supervisor position in the building. We're looking to have somebody to assist Steve in making sure that the communication between the building administrators and the staff that are doing maintenance and custodial services know what's going on and can communicate back and forth. It's also to look for efficiencies and just having somebody on the ground that actually can help organize the workload in the buildings. We have, in some of these buildings, we have 4 or 5 staff and no leader that is there that can actually say, okay, day shift, this is what you need to do. The night shift couldn't get to it, or night shift, this is what the day shift has accomplished, but there's also these other needs, and this is the priorities of those needs. So they'd work in conjunction with Steve, and we're just thinking of probably one for the high school, one for South School, and then one for the Thomason campus. We have in ESSER, I think we have 1 or 2 positions that we budgeted for facilities. We have not spent that money in ESSER. We're not finding a real need right now. We could. I think that's just because of the quality of the staff, and also we just can't hire. Like I said, we have 4 open positions right now, and that's, it's a hard department to keep full. We have a couple of positions that are always rotating in and out. There's not a really substantial amount of equipment in here. This is part of what I'm researching, is how can we possibly purchase equipment and do some of these contracted services in-house. Lawn care, we're talking about possibly taking our field services in-house that we contract out to a company called Sports Fields. The athletic director is working on seeing how we can do that internally better through part-time staff and temporary staff because it's not year-round. What's not in here is any capital improvements. So anything that's on that list of substantial improvements is not in the general budget. I see the general fund budget as our operating budget. It should be pretty consistent year after year. It's not where we put a roof repair. It's not where we put, one every couple of year charges. That's why we put money into the capital reserve, and then we authorize ourselves to spend that. Let the public authorize us to spend that. But that's how we see the capital reserve and capital expenditures. This is kind of a quick list of those capital reserve projects that Steve has identified as more of a priority that don't include any of the ones that we're already doing with ESSER, with the renovation fund money, if that moves forward. But you can see there's a roof at Cushing. We're looking at asphalt or metal. Metal would help accommodate solar. For me, I'm holding off on that because I'd love to be able to work with the state and some other programs to see if we could actually combine a solar ready roof with a solar project. I think there's a good story there, especially with electric buses and everything else that we're trying to do to make sure we decrease our carbon footprint. Ash Point, minor additions. You'll see a road sign. Every school is requested a sign outside their building, so it's on this in their estimates. These are the big ones here at South School. Again, this is a roof. You also see that we have needs to upgrade or replace a lot of our intercom systems to the schools. That's more of a safety concern because we have some pretty old systems that need a lot of repair and a lot of TLC. Again, the roof, increase the lighting, the brightness in the halls and OMS. I haven't really investigated that too much. But you have this list. It was sent to you last week or after the meeting last week. So you have this presentation. But this by itself is $925,000. Clearly, it's nowhere near we can spend that. But as we look to see what our priorities are and what funding we have, and actually what capacity we have to actually do these projects. We have a lot of projects, including the ESSER project with the modulars, including the school revolving renovation fund project, which is another $5 million of projects. And these capital projects, it's just a matter of how much time do we have and people power do we have to do it, even if the money was no issue, which obviously it is. So that's going to be part of our planning for the summer. The custodians and the maintenance work all summer. It's also the time when they take vacations. It's the only time they really can take vacations. But when they're not taking those vacations, they're working and they empty out every single schoolroom and clean it top to bottom, disinfect it, sanitize it, organize it. They do the rooms, they do the floors, they repair carpets or take them out and replace them with VCT tile when necessary. They're doing the ceiling tiles, they're doing lights, they're painting. So it's a huge endeavor. Just on a normal year, it's been complicated, the fact that we are a school for 4 more weeks in the summer than we used to be. Now that we have summer school programs, that limits this time available to do some of these projects. So it's a pretty intensive, labor-intensive summer for this group. So again, yeah, the money's one thing, but the time is that seems to be the limiting factor, I think, for a lot of this.
So for this, are you thinking about like, because you mentioned that you didn't want to do capital improvements in a regular budget. Are you thinking about recommending in the future borrowing or grants? Because you mentioned a little bit about the solar potentially having some grants.
Borrowing, that's a discussion for finance, I think, just as we kind of prioritize these. I think that's really borrowing is a strategy, not really. So, but what the board will see, at least by May 5th, when they vote on it, is the authorization to move money from the undesignated fund balance to the capital reserve, and the authorization to spend that money. And then we'll identify a few of those projects that would be in that. We're not held to those projects, but we do need to get at the budget meeting on the 24th that article approved by the public to allow us to actually move that money from the undesignated fund balance to capital reserve, and then the authorization to spend from the capital reserve on the project. So I think what we'll do is, what we'll talk about at the latest next Thursday is kind of an overview of what those fund transfers will look like, what we're looking to recommend to move to, what our expected surplus will be this year, how that kind of relates to the fund balance as a whole, and what we think that we can put safely into some of these funds, like the fuel reserve, the capital reserve, the special ed reserve funds, and then put those reserve funds in a position where they act as our contingencies as well as our project fund for capital reserve, if that makes sense.
Yeah, obviously the details will be important. All right. So Maria and Dave, do you guys have any questions?
Actually answered some that I had.
Okay. I had one question. I was looking at the equipment furniture line, and the fiscal 21 budget was about 25,000. I'm not sure why I looked at 21. So maybe that I might have written that number down wrong, but recently it was 25,000 and it's now 125,000 this year. So I was wondering what's driving that increase.
Which
equipment, furniture.
Equipment and furniture. So the 5.6, is there an object number or?
I don't know. Let me find out. Yeah.
There's a coding change from last year to this year, which actually reduced our expenditures in capital, like the object code that begins 5.7.
Okay.
And that's all been moved to 5.6.
Oh yeah, I see that happening in one place. So I'm just looking at 504 equipment TGS. There's a $2,500
504. Yeah, 504 equipment is something that we've never really budgeted for, but we're seeing a lot more need for 504 equipment. These are not students that enter special ed, but they still require equipment.
Okay. Okay, maybe a better line. All right. So I'm just looking for a 5,700 line.
So you'll see a lot of those lines.
So I'm seeing a $66,000 decrease. And then if the 5,600 line that I think matches it.
The 56050 or 56111.
56110 and 56050. It's like 10,200. So we've got, but even there, we're still getting an increase. But it may be, I may need to refine my question.
Overall, there was not a change. I didn't move money. I just moved coding around to kind of go back to where the federal capital number was $5,000 per item. And so there's a better code to put it into supplies. It helps with the accounting. It helps with a lot of requirements that aren't required for supplies that are required for the 57 codes.
Okay. All right. I think that was the big question that I had. And I think you answered the other big question I had. Did I check? I'm trying to check the pre-prepped questions we sent. I think we've covered those. I'm just looking through them all. Yeah, I think we have covered those. Excellent. Dave, did you have a question? I think you said no. Okay.
Getting tired.
All right. John, anything you want to say before we let Pete go to bed?
No, always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you
Feel
all.
better.
Oh, Maria, go ahead.
I want to see the kitten.
You know what? She's still too skittish, and so we can't pick her up. But she's
Better.
also, I did